Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the sources you've provided, slice them up, and extract the essential nuggets of knowledge.
Hello.
Today, we are wading into a truly complex and, frankly, a terrifying narrative.
We really are.
We're talking about Project Monarch.
And this is a deep dive that requires some real surgical precision.
Why is that?
Because the topic sits at this really difficult intersection. On one hand, you have the verifiable historical atrocities committed by the U.S. government. That's fact.
Okay.
But on the other, you have this elaborate, enduring, modern folklore. For a lot of people, Project Monarch is the ultimate deep state conspiracy.
Right. So the documents you've shared, they really compel us to conduct a kind of bifurcated investigation.
That's a good way to put it.
First, we need to map out the historical psychological bedrock. We have to understand precisely where the documented reality of CIA mind control, which you know as MKUltra, ends.
And then second, we have to meticulously investigate the semiotic and cultural claims.
The mythology.
The specific mythology of Monarch programming, the so-called language of control, and how people apply it to high-profile figures.
Yeah.
You know, Britney Spears, Lady Gaga.
The core question we are holding for you, the listener, is this. Is Project Monarch a clandestine sub-program actively and currently creating mind-controlled slaves using trauma?
Or, and this is the other side of the coin, does this entire incredibly detailed narrative function primarily as a powerful metaphorical framework?
A framework for what?
A way for the public to process its very real, very justified distrust of systemic exploitation and, the uncanny nature of celebrity itself.
We're going to trace the line between fact and fear. Let's dive into the documented reality first, because, without the historical facts, the entire theory has no foundation.
None at all.
So let's start there. It is absolutely crucial to establish the brutal reality of Project MKUltra first.
It is. This is not theory. I have to repeat that. This is confirmed, declassified historical fact.
And the necessity for this program, however insane it seems now, was born out of pure Cold War anxiety.
Pure paranoia. The sources are crystal clear. MKUltra was initiated on April 13th, 1953.
Right.
And that's by an order from the CIA director himself, Allen Dulles.
So why then? What was the immediate threat that prompted the U.S. intelligence community to greenlight these, extreme illegal experiments?
It was just the fear of a brainwashing gap. That was the term.
A brainwashing gap.
Yeah. After the Korean War, American officials were just horrified by the public confessions of U.S. prisoners of war.
The ones who admitted to germ warfare crimes.
Exactly. And they publicly denounced the United States. These men showed clear signs of manipulation, psychological coercion, or some kind of deep ideological conversion.
So Dulles and the CIA leadership, they just believed the communist bloc,
The Soviets, the Chinese,
had mastered some kind of psychological weapon that the U.S. just didn't have.
total mind control. That's what they thought they were up against. They felt this urgent need to close that perceived gap.
It's staggering to think about the level of paranoia required to initiate something so profoundly unethical.
It is. And the operational scope of MKUltra was intentionally opaque. It was designed to be.
Vast and compartmentalized, I'm guessing.
Incredibly so. The program was headed by a chemist, Sidney Gottlieb.
A chemist?
Yep, working under the technical services staff. And his official goal, it wasn't just to gather intelligence. It was to develop chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of controlling human behavior.
So they were looking for methods to, what, induce amnesia?
Amnesia, create shock states, enforce compliance, or just render enemies completely docile. Anything and everything.
And this wasn't just Gottlieb tinkering in a basement lab somewhere.
Oh, no. The sources detail the sheer scope. It was an umbrella program covering over 149 sub-projects.
149. And where were these experiments actually taking place?
They were contracted out to institutions all across North America, universities, hospitals, prisons, even pharmaceutical companies.
And did these places know they were getting CIA funding?
Many of them had no idea. To maintain that secrecy, the CIA funneled the funds and the research requests through a whole web of front organizations.
Right, I saw one mentioned frequently in the documents.
The Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology.
That's the one.
It was this elaborate concealment that ensured both plausible deniability for the government and complete ignorance for the unwitting subjects.
The secrecy wasn't just maintained during the operation, though. It culminated in an active attempt to erase the program from history.
It did. And that created the very void that later conspiracy theories would just rush to fill.
Let's talk about the bibliocost.
Right. So in 1973, The shadow of the Watergate scandal is getting longer and longer.
So the government is under scrutiny.
Extreme scrutiny.
Yeah.
And the CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, he anticipates future congressional investigations into past abuses. So he orders the total destruction of all MKUltra files.
All of them.
All of them. This deliberate act of record purging is what's often referred to as the bibliocost.
That one act created a permanent historical wound. So if the program's records were truly and wholly destroyed, how did we ever find out about its existence?
By sheer, almost unbelievable bureaucratic error.
An accident.
A total accident.
4
years after the destruction order, in 1977, a cache of roughly 20,000 documents was accidentally discovered in a retired records center.
Wow.
And crucially, these were financial documents, receipts, contracts, funding applications, not operational notes or subject names.
Ah, so they were handled by a different department.
Exactly, the accounting department. They just bypassed Helms's purge order. It was these salvaged 20,000 pages that forced the CIA to finally admit the program existed, and that triggered the subsequent Senate hearings.
It's a chilling reminder that the only reason we know the full extent of the CIA's intent is basically due to a filing oversight.
Pretty much, yeah.
So let's move from the intent to the mechanisms of control. When the average person hears MKUltra, they immediately think LSD.
They do.
But the pharmacology was far wider. What were they testing and why?
The drug testing was frighteningly broad. It was listed under code names like MK Search.
And while LSD is the famous one.
Right, for interrogation and destabilization. But researchers were actively investigating heroin, morphine, mescaline, psilocybin, scopolamine,
Source serum.
and sodium pentothal, what we commonly call truth serum, along with countless other psychoactive compounds.
So the goal wasn't just to make people talk.
No, it was to find agents that induced total persistent amnesia or a state of shock. They wanted to create a blank slate or just a totally compliant subject.
And within this broad chemical experimentation, there was one operation, Operation Midnight Climax.
Yes.
It's often cited as the direct historical precursor to the alleged sexual slavery component of the Project Monarch theory.
That's a key link, a really key link. In Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA set up these safe houses in San Francisco and New York.
Okay.
They hired sex workers to bring unsuspecting men back to these locations, where they were then secretly dosed with LSD.
And the agents just...
CIA agents would observe the results and the reactions from behind two-way mirrors, analyzing the subject's behavior in a compromised, chemically altered, and sexually exploitative state.
It's just staggering to realize that this combination of psychological and sexual exploitation combined with non-consensual drug administration was funded by the U.S. government.
Yes.
It perfectly captures why public distrust of these kinds of intelligence narratives is so deeply entrenched today.
It really does. It shows the agency's willingness to use sexual contexts and drugs for operational goals, regardless of any ethical or legal boundaries.
But the chemical approach, you're saying that was arguably less insidious than the non-pharmacological route of Subproject 68.
I would argue that yes, Subproject 68 provides the most solid historical foundation for the alleged trauma-based techniques of Monarch.
This is the section that for me makes the leap from experiment to calculated torture.
I agree.
So Subproject 68 was headed by Dr. D. Ewan Cameron at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal.
In Canada, yes.
What exactly was his horrifying methodology of depatterning and psychic driving?
Cameron's theory was radical and barbaric. He believed that psychological disorders could be cured, or, more importantly for the CIA, that a mind could be reprogrammed, but only by first wiping the existing personality completely clean.
He called it depatterning.
Exactly. The goal was to regress the adult patient to an infantile or near-vegetative state.
Creating a tabula rasa.
A blank slate for new programming.
Yes, and the regimen he developed to achieve this blank slate sounds like something out of a horror movie. We need to detail the specifics here because the contrast with any standard ethical medical procedure is just essential for context.
The victims, and many of them had checked in for minor issues like anxiety or even postpartum depression.
Oh, wow.
They were subjected to this calculated, systematic regimen of destabilization and abuse.
So first, the electroconvulsive therapy.
Right. Cameron administered shocks at voltages 20 to 40 times higher than what was considered normal or safe at the time.
20 to 40 times higher.
And this was done 2 or 3 times per day.
How did that specific detail, the super high voltage, change the classification of this from experiment to torture in the eyes of later inquiries?
Because the stated medical goal was therapeutic failure.
What do you mean?
The electrical overload was specifically designed to induce a profound and sustained confusional state, not recovery. It physically damaged the brain. It obliterated the patient's ability to form continuous, coherent memory. It destroyed their sense of self and time.
It moved beyond misguided treatment into deliberate destruction.
That's it, exactly.
And following the physical shock, the patients were put into so-called sleep therapy.
Yes, they were kept chemically unconscious for weeks, sometimes months, using these powerful cocktails of barbiturates and thorazine.
And that was combined with
Extreme sensory deprivation, isolation in dark, soundproof rooms. The purpose was twofold: to ensure they were entirely dependent on the doctor, the handler, and to further destabilize the psyche, making them vulnerable to suggestion.
And once the depatterning was complete, the attempted repatterning began.
The psychic driving.
The psychic driving.
This is the direct link to the Monarch conditioning theory. Cameron would play recorded messages, often simple instructions, phrases, or repeated commands, on a relentless loop.
How relentless.
The sources note this could happen hundreds of thousands of times, piped through speakers hidden under the patient's pillows, or sometimes locked into helmets.
And the goal was forced behavioral engineering.
Programming specific responses onto this freshly traumatized, infantile mind through sheer, relentless repetition.
The outcome was just devastating. These victims were left with profound lifelong damage.
They suffered permanent amnesia, severe cognitive deficits, and debilitating regression, sometimes to the point of thumb-sucking and incontinence. It rendered them shells of their former selves.
And the CIA funded this.
The fact that the CIA funded research that clearly violated the Nuremberg Code research intended to erase and rewrite human identity using trauma and repetition, that is the non-negotiable bedrock. If the U.S. government did this in the 50s and 60s, a skeptical but informed public naturally asks, who is to say they didn't continue this, refined under a different name?
That is the crucial, chilling question. And finally, before we transition fully into the theory, we have the alleged Nazi origins of these techniques.
The paperclip connection.
The idea that the CIA didn't invent this, but inherited it via Operation Paperclip.
And Operation Paperclip is also a historical fact. After World War II, the U.S. secretly recruited over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians.
Many with checkered pasts.
Often those with very checkered pasts, yes, to work for the U.S. military and intelligence community.
So the scientific transfer is real, but the specific link to trauma-based mind control, that remains folklore.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The conspiracy claims that techniques for trauma-based control, specifically research into dissociation and human endurance, conducted by figures like Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz,
Horrifying.
were transferred to the U.S. and evolved into Monarch programming.
But there's no paper trail for that specific link.
There isn't. While paperclip scientists were involved in documented unethical research like chemical and biological warfare experimentation at places like Edgewood Arsenal, the direct, specific link between Mengele's research and CIA mind control programming is confined solely to conspiracy literature.
It's a powerful narrative element, though. It adds this layer of historical darkness.
It does, but it lacks the documentary confirmation of MKUltra itself.
So we have the verified intent to achieve mind control, we have the verified use of trauma-based techniques, and the verified destruction of the program's files.
Oh, in fact.
But as you pointed out, the term Project Monarch is absent from the salvaged 20,000 MKUltra records.
From the subsequent church committee transcripts. It's just not there.
And that absence, that void left by the destroyed documents, is what allowed the theory to really take root and flourish in the 1990s.
It is. The theory needed a voice, an architect, and a detailed blueprint to gain traction.
And that architect was Kathy O'Brien.
That's the name.
Let's focus on the O'Brien narrative, as it provides the specific operational claims that define Monarch programming today.
O'Brien is the central narrative source for the entire theory. In her 1995 book, Transformation of America, she alleges she is a survivor who was systematically sold into the program by her father as a child.
Her core claim being that she was subjected to ritualistic and systematic sexual and physical abuse, all designed to shatter her personality.
To fragment it, yes.
But her allegations didn't just stop at personal testimony. They claimed the program was running at the highest levels of government.
Oh, yeah. She describes what she termed the presidential model of programming. According to her narrative, these slaves were created with highly specialized functions.
What kind of functions?
Some were programmed with photographic memory for high-level courier work.
So transporting classified secrets.
Right. And others were created as compliant, highly sexual personas used to serve as politicians, dignitaries, and the global elite for blackmail purposes.
And she named names.
She implicated high-ranking officials from the Reagan-Bush era, Canadian politicians like Pierre Trudeau, and even figures in the country music industry.
That level of detail, implicating specific individuals and detailing specific functions, that's what gives the theory its traction among proponents.
It is. And her testimony also codified the role of triggers.
Right, the triggers.
She claimed the trauma was calculated. Electroshock, sleep deprivation, ritualized violence used to force the personality split, or DV'd.
And once fractured.
Specific alters were programmed to respond to specific cues. These triggers, which are now famous in the lore, include nursery rhymes, phrases from classic films like The Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland.
Or hand signals, specific symbols.
All of it.
But this is a crucial pivot point. If we're examining this impartially, we have to challenge the narrative's historical rigor. What is the consensus among investigative critics regarding the O'Brien narrative?
The consensus, particularly in clinical and investigative journalism circles, it leans heavily towards skepticism.
About the specific claims of the Monarch program?
Yes. Critics point to two major issues. First, there's a consistent lack of corroborating evidence for the high-level political involvement she alleges.
Okay.
And second, there are noted inconsistencies in her detailed timeline and overall narrative across different tellings of her story.
So the skeptical view doesn't dismiss the possibility of trauma or abuse, but rather the highly structured, almost logistical nature of the CIA-run plot she describes.
Exactly. But whether it's fact or folklore, her story established the foundational paradigm.
Which is?
That systematic engineered trauma is the core tool, and that the victims are hidden in plain sight as highly visible yet inwardly enslaved public figures.
And this paradigm led directly to the complex taxonomy of control.
Right, popularized by subsequent theorists like Ron Patton and Fritz Springmeier.
Let's spend some time on this taxonomy because it transforms the theory from a mere allegation of abuse into a kind of pseudo-scientific operational manual.
It does.
But if this program were real, wouldn't such a complex sci-fi taxonomy be impossible to manage across hundreds of agents? I mean, doesn't the sheer complexity make it sound more like post-hoc theorizing than covert ops?
That is the core point of friction. It looks more like an attempt to impose a highly organized structure onto the naturally chaotic and painful process of psychological fragmentation.
And theorists use this structure to classify every observed celebrity behavior.
Every single one. The categories are allegedly based on functional roles or, in some of the more speculative accounts, specific brainwave states.
Let's go through the 5 main programming levels defined in the source material, starting with ALPHA.
ALPHA is the baseline, the general programming. It's characterized by allegedly forcing extremely pronounced memory retention, increased physical strength, and visual acuity in the subject.
This is the courier alter.
That's the one, used for courier work, requiring precise recall of classified information. And because it is the foundation, the triggers are usually simple codes or standard operational signals.
Next, the most cited level in pop culture analysis, beta programming.
Beta is the sexual programming, often called the sex kitten alter. The alleged purpose is to eliminate all moral or sexual inhibitions and stimulate primitive sexual instincts.
And these alters are used for?
Extensively for blackmail, espionage honey traps, and elite servitude. The symbolism here is the richest and most detailed.
What kind of symbolism?
Extensive feline imagery cats, leopard prints, the signature colors pink and purple, and the historical link to Marilyn Monroe, who is retroactively labeled a beta slave.
The original archetype of the sexually compliant, tragic public figure.
Possibly.
Moving to Delta, which sounds like the most physically dangerous role.
Delta is the killer or assassin programming. This level is allegedly designed for agents optimized to be devoid of fear, adrenaline optimized, and capable of executing missions without conscience.
The sleeper agent.
Exactly. Theorists link this to sleeper agents who have total amnesia regarding the event afterward. The symbolism is predictably militaristic, often including triangles, the Greek letter delta, and dark aesthetics.
Then we reach theta, and this is where the theory moves firmly into the occult.
Very firmly. Theta is the psychic or occult programming. Proponents allege this level involves the acquisition of extrasensory abilities like telepathy or remote viewing.
And this is linked to bloodlines.
Often linked specifically to bloodline subjects. individuals allegedly stemming from multi-generational families already involved in occult or satanic rituals.
And the symbolism.
Explicit occult symbols, references to the third eye or the all-seeing eye, and crystals.
Omega programming, the self-destruct mechanism.
Yes, the code green. It's designed to be activated when the victim starts recovering too many memories, threatening the core programming.
So it's a kill switch.
A self-inflicted kill switch. Activation allegedly induces suicidal tendencies, self-mutilation, or catastrophic depression to silence the threat permanently. The symbolism is the omega sign and themes of self-destruction and death.
And finally, JAMA.
Gamma is the system protection altar, designed solely to misdirect. These altars are programmed to mislead interrogators, therapists, or journalists with misinformation, red herrings, or fantastical stories, ensuring the core structure remains intact.
The symbolism there being mazes, masks, confusion.
Pervasive confusion.
What stands out here is that this detailed hierarchy demands a perfect, precise control over the human psyche.
It does.
And that brings us to our next section, because to believe in this program, you have to believe in the weaponization of the brain's natural defense mechanisms.
We have to ground this discussion in the documented reality of the psychological mechanism that the Monarch theory claims to exploit.
Dissociation.
Dissociation. It is the bedrock of the entire concept of trauma-based mind control.
And dissociation is the mind's natural defense when facing that primal fight, flight, or freeze response.
Exactly. When a human being, and this is most easily established in a child during critical developmental years, is subjected to overwhelming, chronic, inescapable trauma, the mind recognizes that neither fighting nor fleeing is possible.
So it executes the freeze response.
Dissociation. The physical body endures the pain, but the psyche detaches. It retreats psychologically. It walls off the traumatic event and the associated pain into a separate memory compartment to preserve the core self's ability to maintain sanity and function.
And the sources confirm that repeated chronic dissociation during childhood leads to the fragmentation of the psyche.
Into distinct operational parts, yes. What clinicians recognize as dissociative identity disorder, or did.
Why is a child's brain uniquely vulnerable to this type of conditioning?
Well, a child's personality isn't fully integrated yet. The walls between self and experience are still porous.
So trauma acts like a sledgehammer on this structure.
It does. And the theory posits that the programmer recognizes this developmental fragility and intentionally, calculatedly uses trauma to force the split. The goal is to install the software, the commands, into that freshly dissociative state before the mind has a chance to integrate the experience.
This alleged programming mechanism, it relies entirely on the simple, verifiable principles of classical conditioning.
It's pure Pavlov.
So let's formally map out the mechanism using those Pavlovian terms.
Okay, if we view the programming process scientifically, the programmer is using basic stimulus response chains. The unconditioned stimulus is the trauma itself, the pain, the fear, the isolation.
And that causes the automatic, natural, unconditioned response.
Which is the dissociation or personality split.
Then the handler introduces the specific trigger.
And that trigger is the conditioned stimulus. It's a neutral cue, a song, a symbol, a nursery rhyme, deliberately introduced during the peak of the trauma. The mind links that neutral cue to the state of overwhelming pain and dissociation.
And the ultimate goal is the conditioned response.
Which is, later, when the victim sees the symbol or hears the cue, the desired alter is instantaneously triggered to the front, manifesting the specific program behavior.
The example of The Wizard of Oz provides the perfect, horrifying illustration of this.
It really does.
Yeah.
If a child is tortured or electroshocked while seeing images of a yellow brick road or hearing "Somewhere Over the Rainbow,"
that specific cultural artifact becomes deeply entwined with the trauma response.
Exactly. The trigger is easy to deploy publicly or privately. A handler simply needs to hum the tune, and the subject allegedly switches into a compliant trance state. That is the fundamental theory of trauma-based mind control.
This detailed structure, however, it takes us directly to the source of the most intense skepticism surrounding Monarch.
It does.
The controversy over false memory and its origins in the satanic ritual abuse, or SRA, panic.
This is the crucial counterpoint. Monarch narratives emerged during the 1980s and 90s SRA panic. That was an era where thousands of allegations surfaced claiming children were being systematically abused by clandestine cults.
And many of these accounts, including the original Monarch testimony, were produced through a practice known as recovered memory therapy.
That's right.
Recovered memory therapy used aggressive techniques like hypnosis and guided imagery to help patients retrieve memories of repressed abuse. Why did this practice become so controversial?
Well, critics, notably the False Memory Syndrome Foundation and many mainstream clinical psychologists, they argued that these techniques were highly suggestive.
So they were planting memories.
They contended that therapists, genuinely wanting to help, inadvertently implanted false memories in vulnerable patients by asking leading questions that presupposed the existence of ritualistic abuse or structured conspiracies.
So the skeptical view doesn't deny that the people sharing these stories experienced genuine, often severe, trauma.
No, not at all.
Instead, it questions the highly specific, detailed, and often ritualistic content of the recovered memory.
Precisely. Skeptics suggest that Project Monarch functions not as a CIA program, but as a social delusion or a modern myth, a psychological framework that blends genuine existing trauma, the effects of therapeutic malpractice, and the pre-existing SRA conspiracy lore.
So the details of Monarch, the specific rituals, the bloodlines, the structured systems of altars, they often mirror the debunked SRA narratives.
They do, suggesting a cultural blending rather than a covert operational reality.
It provides survivors with a cohesive, powerful external enemy, the programmers, to explain their internal fragmentation. It's easier to blame a shadow government than to navigate chaos.
And that structural function is why the theory is so enduring. It gives a name and a logical structure to inexplicable pain.
Let's pivot now to the most visible and, I guess, entertaining part of the theory, the symbols.
Semiotic.
Proponents claim these symbols are intentionally woven into mass entertainment for a dual purpose.
What's that?
They desensitize the public to the existence of mind control, and they act as subliminal triggers for the programmed victims.
This is where we need to apply detailed semiotic contrast. Are these symbols truly a language of control managed by handlers? Or are they cases of aesthetic appropriation, where artists use universally recognizable tropes of identity crisis and constraint to critique the reality of fame?
Let's start with the central image, the namesake, the monarch butterfly. What's the conspiracy interpretation of this symbol?
For proponents, the butterfly is the explicit mark of the slave.
The mark of the slave.
It represents the victim undergoing the metamorphosis of programming. The subject enters the cocoon, a state of trauma or depatterning, and emerges as a new, programmed creation.
And the name itself?
Monarch. It symbolizes the handler's total sovereign control. The migratory behavior of the butterfly is often linked to bloodline programming, a generational slave inherently knowing their path.
So that interpretation paints the transformation as a forced mutation. But aesthetically, the butterfly has a profound and ancient lineage of meaning.
Absolutely. In ancient Greek, the word psyche means both butterfly and soul. It's a timeless symbol of transcendence, metamorphosis, and the soul freeing itself from the chrysalis or the earthbound self. The documents reference figures like Mariah Carey, who explicitly used the butterfly motif to symbolize her personal liberation from an abusive marriage and the reclaiming of her artistic and personal agency.
So both sides agree on the core theme of transformation, but they assign radically different agents.
Yes. In art, the agent is self-will. In the theory, the agent is the handler. It's the difference between a symbol of self-actualization and a symbol of ownership.
And the symbol is so common that it gains traction just by being everywhere.
The ubiquity ensures that the conspiracy interpretation gains traction because the image of transformation is just so visually compelling.
Next, let's look at the mirror and shattered glass, a trope that is everywhere in music videos and celebrity photography.
Conspiracy decoding here is chillingly literal. The shattered mirror is the precise visual representation of dissociative identity disorder.
The personality fractured into multiple autonomous alters.
Exactly. Theorists allege mirrors are actively used in programming to force the victim to confront their alters or induce a dissociative trance state. Alice through the looking glass becomes a literal instruction set to enter a dissociative wonderland.
The idea of a dual reflection, the host self watching the programmed alter take over, is incredibly powerful.
It is. Culturally, however, the mirror is one of the oldest symbols for identity formation.
The Lacan mirror stage.
Exactly. The philosophical query of self-perception versus reality. In high art and fashion, a shattered mirror often signifies the destruction of a perceived false image. For a pop star, it represents the profound disconnect between the perfect, often manufactured public persona, the reflection, and the genuine private self,
So shattering the mirror is an act of rebellion.
an attempt to destroy the facade.
This is the most compelling of the symbols, because both interpretations align on the meaning of psychological fragmentation and brokenness.
They do. Whether it's caused by CIA torture or the structural violence of the celebrity machine, the mind is depicted as broken. It's a symbolic overlap that gives the theory its potency.
Let's transition to the labyrinth and the cage. What is the Monarch interpretation of the labyrinthine visual?
The labyrinth represents the deliberately engineered internal mind structure. The theory suggests programmers build these intricate mental mazes to hide core memories and command structures.
And these labyrinths, they contain internal booby traps.
The Omega suicide programs, yes, designed to eliminate any outside force, like a therapist or a journalist, who attempts to navigate the victim's mind without the proper codes.
And the physical constraint of the birdcage.
Birdcages specifically represent the physical and mental imprisonment of the songbird, the talented singer or performer who is kept for the pleasure and profit of the elite.
But the gilded cage is a classic commentary on women in power.
Historically, yes. It's a potent Victorian feminist trope critiquing the notion of women being financially comfortable, but fundamentally unfree. In the modern context, it refers directly to the constraints of the music industry. 360 deals, punitive contracts, the loss of privacy.
Which perfectly describes the life of a globally famous individual.
Perfectly. And artistically, the labyrinth is a Jungian symbol of the quest for individuation, a journey to the center of the self to find inner peace, not a trap.
Finally, the imagery of mannequins, dolls, and robots, which again ties directly back to the physical beta programming.
For theorists, doll or robot imagery signifies the victim's total lack of agency. They are a mind-controlled slave without free will.
The doll imagery infantilizes the victim.
Right, treating the beta alter as a sexual toy to be used and discarded. Glitchy or mechanical dance movements are interpreted as the physical manifestation of a malfunctioning alter, unable to hold the programmed persona.
Yet this puppet and robot imagery is also a classic artistic critique of corporate control.
It is. The use of mannequins and robots in fashion and performance art has long critiqued the objectification of women and the treatment of artists as products.
The sources remind us that bands like NSYNC used puppet imagery in Bye 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 to critique their own treatment as corporate commodities.
The point remains the same. The subject lacks autonomy. But the Monarch theory assigns that loss to a secret CIA plot, while the aesthetic interpretation assigns it to corporate machinery and societal objectification. So now we apply this decoding framework to the famous visuals. Proponents view the saturation of these symbols as a revelation of the method.
The handlers deliberately exposing their control system through mass media.
Exactly. We need to contrast this with the stated or inferred artistic intent.
And let's start with the central figure in all modern Monarch lore, Britney Spears. Her highly public mental health struggles, the head shaving in 2007,
Interpreted as shedding the beta alter.
and the 13-year conservatorship are viewed by proponents as a direct result of the program malfunctioning and the subsequent re-imprisonment by her handlers.
She is the poster child for the princess in the gilded cage and provides the strongest visual evidence for the theory. Let's look closely at the video Hold It Against Me from 2011.
The visuals are intense. Spears is in a sterile, white, cylindrical room connected to AV lines that appear to be draining something essential.
And then she engages in this violent battle with a physical duplicate of herself.
The conspiracy decoding is entirely literal.
Entirely. The 5V lines represent the draining of her essential life force or the chemical injection of programming drugs. The White Room is a classic programming site or a sensory deprivation chamber from Subproject 68.
And the fight.
The fight with the duplicate is the literal physical battle between their true self and the aggressive alter programmed by the system. Theorists even point to small visual effects, like the fleeting, elongated smile, as a demonic manifestation or a glitch in the clone's operating system.
But the aesthetic context, driven by director Jonas Åkerlund, is self-aware commentary.
Åkerlund is famous for visually dense, often dark, editorial imagery. He's openly stated that he incorporates ambiguities because he knows fans dissect every frame.
So he's leveraging the conspiracy mindset for engagement.
He is. The video is an allegory. The microphones, the wires, the constant light, the fight, it is the media draining her, and her own manufactured celebrity brand, the Britney persona, becoming her existential enemy.
So the glitch smile is just a visual effect.
It's not a sign of demonic possession. It's a deliberate cracking of the perfect facade under intense pressure.
And if we look earlier in her career, The song Lucky from 2000 is also heavily decoded.
It is.
The lyrics describe a lonely Hollywood star who cries alone at night despite having wealth and fame.
Proponents claim Lucky is the name of our programmed altar, and the lyrics are a literal cry for help from the enslaved self, expressing the profound emptiness of the mind-controlled subject who lacks autonomy.
But if you look at the biographical context of a 19-year-old girl who achieved global, unprecedented fame,
The lyrics read as a profound, albeit simple, self-aware commentary. It's a straightforward, poignant description of the isolation and loneliness inherent in being a public commodity,
it's the core gilded cage phenomenon.
perfectly illustrated through the artist's own voice. It requires no subterranean CIA plot to explain the emotional distress. The truth is often hiding in the simplest interpretation.
Let's move to Lady Gaga. She is often interpreted differently, not as a victim, but as a willing participant, a high priestess of the alleged Illuminati.
Openly using and flaunting the symbolism for control.
Yes.
Bad Romance from 2009 is the case study here. The video is packed. Gaga's dragged out of a white coffin-like pod, forced to drink vodka, and then sold to Russian mobsters in an auction.
The decoding is intense.
It is. The white pod is the programming site representing rebirth into slavery. The forced drugging is chemical submission for beta programming. The sale to the Russian mob literally depicts the sale of a programmed sexual slave to global elites. Theorists even claim her distinctive claw-like hand sign is an occult mudra of allegiance.
But the artistic context grounds it firmly in high-fashion surrealism.
Completely. The shoes she wore were the infamous armadillo boots by Alexander McQueen. It made the video a visual monument to fashion history and performance art.
Yeah, and the sale narrative.
When viewed through a critical lens, it's a radical feminist critique of the music industry system, where female artists are repeatedly treated as literal, disposable commodities to be bought and sold by wealthy, powerful men.
And she reclaims her agency.
By killing the buyer with a pyro bra, a deliberate act of destructive empowerment. Her monster concept is about exploring the darkest parts of the self-obsession, fame, and addiction, themes far more common to artistic self-exploration than deep state control.
Finally, a more recent example, the Weeknd's Super Bowl LV halftime show in 2021.
Heavily decoded.
Because of the striking visuals, the red suit and the hundreds of dancers, and the Weeknd himself appearing with full face bandages.
Moving in synchronized, unsettling, robotic fashion.
The conspiracy reading was immediate. The bandages symbolize the faceless, programmed slave post-surgery with a changed identity.
The red suit symbolizes blood sacrifice, and the rigid synchronization confirms the hive mind of the controlled masses.
But the Weeknd, Abel Tesfaye, was explicit about the artistic intent.
He was. The bandages were part of the After Hours narrative arc, a character who had spent a night of debauchery in Las Vegas, resulting in physical injury and the price of vanity.
And he stated clearly that the bandages were a direct commentary on the absurdity and vanity of Hollywood celebrity culture.
And the intense pressure to conform to unrealistic, surgically enhanced standards. It was a critique of the industry's values, not an endorsement of a ritual.
We've established that in virtually every major pop culture example, the symbolism has a clear, artistically sound interpretation rooted in celebrity commentary, psychological exploration, or fashion critique.
Yes.
Yet the Project Monarch narrative persists. If the program is unproven, why does this specific mythology endure, and why do artists keep incorporating these precise symbols?
The answer is economic and sociological. The sources highlight the concept of the attention economy and the commodification of Illuminati chic.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
The music industry realized that conspiracy theories generate massive, highly engaged audiences. Ambiguity is profitable.
Right. So when a video contains ambiguous symbols, a butterfly, an eye, a pyramid,
It is instantly gamified. Social media users dissect it frame by frame, boosting view counts, watch time, and cultural relevance. This obsessive dissection acts as free, viral marketing, generating millions in unearned publicity.
it's cynical provocation marketing. We saw this with Doja Cat and Lil Nas X, who intentionally use occult or transgressive aesthetics.
Knowing they will provoke an outrage cycle in conservative or conspiracy circles. It's a guaranteed business model. They appropriate the cool, dark elements of secret societies, the idea of hidden power, brokenness, rebellion, and transform it into a marketable aesthetic.
The ambiguity ensures maximal engagement from both those who find it alluring and those who find it repulsive.
The artists are profiting from the anxiety the public already feels.
But this leads us to the most powerful conclusion: the monarch theory as a metaphorical truth.
That's it.
While we may never find a CIA agent named the Handler, electroshocking a pop star in a white room today, the reality of the music industry creates a structure functionally identical to the slavery described in the theory.
That is the core takeaway. The system exhibits forms of structural violence and control that mirror the monarch dynamic, even without the sci-fi elements.
Like exploitation through 360 deals.
Where the label owns every aspect of the artist's life and career, dictating image and output.
And we see the profound loss of autonomy, perfectly exemplified by the Britney Spears conservatorship.
A legal mechanism that allowed successful adults to be stripped of their basic human rights, unable to drive, vote, or make simple health decisions without external permission.
That enforced dependency, it mirrors the handler-slave relationship far more closely than any secret hypnosis.
It does. And that dynamic is also replicated in the documented history of abuse allegations against powerful figures in the industry, producers, executives, managers, who leveraged their position to enforce submission, power imbalances, and sometimes sexual exploitation. This is real-world abuse hiding in plain sight.
And finally, the universal experience of identity fragmentation. The sheer pressure of global fame forces the artist to split the public persona from the private self.
That act of necessary self-preservation is a form of dissociation required to endure the trauma of constant, unrelenting scrutiny and commodification.
So the conspiracy theory takes this structural violence of capitalism, legal systems, and the relentless media machine and translates it into the narrative violence of a science fiction mind control plot.
It's a mechanism for explaining the inexplicable tragedy of fame.
So let's synthesize the final verdict based on everything we have reviewed today. Let's draw a clear distinction for the listener.
Okay, MKUltra is fact. Unethical, illegal mind control experiments using drugs, sensory deprivation, trauma-based abuse, and techniques designed to erase identity were conducted by the CIA between 1953 and 1973.
With clear historical documentation of intent and methodology, specifically via Subproject 68.
Right.
Project Monarch is theory. The existence of a specific, named subproject dedicated to creating beta sex slaves via trauma is unproven.
The narrative relies heavily on controversial, uncorroborated testimony, and its complex taxonomy reads more like a post-hoc conspiracy myth than a covert operational manual.
And the symbolism.
The symbolism is metaphor and marketing. The symbols, butterflies, mirrors, cages, they are undeniable, but they are far more likely to represent aesthetic appropriation.
Artists expressing universal themes of trauma and identity crisis.
While the industry cynically exploits the conspiracy dollar because ambiguity drives engagement and cultural relevance.
Project Monarch, therefore, functions as a modern dark myth that processes the public's justified distrust of unaccountable intelligence agencies and the exploitative entertainment industry. It uses sci-fi horror to explain real-world, mundane abuses of power.
The Monarch theory provides a highly specific, secret explanation for the tragedy of celebrity. It functions as a distorted mirror, reflecting our anxiety about manipulation.
But it refracts these valid concerns into a phantasmagoria of secret rituals and hypnotism.
And in doing so, it often obscures the actual systemic exploitation, financial, legal, and psychological laws that occurs openly, sanctioned by law and industry practice.
We find it easier to believe in an invisible traumatic form of control, a hypnotist's trigger phrase, or CIA torture, to explain why talented, vibrant people collapse under the weight of fame.
We do.
But what is the true horror is the highly visible, mundane, legalistic process, the restrictive contract, the court-mandated conservatorship, the financial pressure that systematically strips a human being of their autonomy and rights, all in the open.
That confrontation with the boring, visible reality of exploitation, rather than the thrilling, invisible plot, is the ultimate reflection we find in the shattered mirror of this deep dive.
Thank you for joining us as we unpack the facts, the folklore, and the fears surrounding Project Monarch. We'll see you next time.